Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. We're going to hit some hot button issues with Terry Patience. He's the president of the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we're going to hit some of the big things like women in priesthood, polygamy, LGBT issues. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Well, I want to open up a can of worms, if I may. 1984, that was kind of the big deal. And I remember I talked to Jim about the ordination of women. Mm-hmm. And of course, the LDS, we don't ordain women currently either. And so, I mean, do you have a comment on that? Why shouldn't, I'll play devil's advocate, why shouldn't women be ordained?
First of all, I think all of us need to respect the fact that women can provide ministry. I've had LDS friends who were able to go to a person's bedside and just provide wonderful, wonderful ministry, counseling, comfort, etc. with it. I think the Relief Society that Emma established was a good example of them providing ministry for that. But is that priesthood? Is that authority? And you and I would agree that I think that there's an authority from God that the men carry, and that's one of the responsibilities that we have, is to carry that priesthood down through the ages and to provide the ordinances, to do the ordinances the way they were originally set up in the church. Church being for us 1830 and so forth, as Joseph set it up with it. So we have never gone down that path. And I think that was one of the big issues in 1984 was that the people who left the organized church at that time really balked against women in the priesthood. But do they balk against women being able to provide ministry? I don't think so.
Well, that brings up another point. I know in the LDS Church, up through the 1930s, they used to allow women to actually anoint with oil and lay hands on the sick. And then around that time, they said, you know what, we should if there are elders around, we should call them to do it. Mm-hmm. And even Joseph Smith said, there's no problem with that. Is that something that your church allows, is women to anoint with oil?
No.
Even though it was okay with Joseph? How come?
I don't know that I'm familiar with that historical point.
Oh, you got to read some Jonathan Stapley. I'll send that to you. He's done a lot of research on it.
Sometimes I have to admit that I'll look at some of the things that are at least attributed to Joseph and question whether or not they really were.
Okay.
I've got books, even in the bookcase over here, that are written by LDS authors, and I'm reading some of that stuff, and I'm going, did Joseph really think that way? Prove that Joseph was really the author of this. Even in Joseph Smith's teachings, sometimes as I look at those, it's not really contributed to Joseph. It's more like Joseph said this. Well, does that make it doctrine? So, no, we would not go down that path to where we would rather have the ladies call up an elder of the church. That would be more appropriate.
Okay. Margaret Toscano, she's been excommunicated from the LDS Church. A lot for her beliefs about women being ordained, as well as Mother in Heaven and some things like that. But she has really. There's a book called Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, and to her, that was a huge revelation. She says that when Joseph organized the Relief Society,
Joseph laid hands on Emma.
Definitely laid a hand on Emma, but he said, I turn the key to you, as in a priesthood key. Now, the LDS Church has actually originally changed that quote and said, I turn that key on your behalf. And she feels that the original, and there's a book called The Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith that she just loves, that Joseph said was basically creating a quorum out of the Relief Society.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah. So I guess if it were demonstrated, you can watch.
However, that would be
Yeah.
demonstrated. Yeah.
But do you see that as possibly changing your view on female ordination?
All of the conversations that I've ever had would make it difficult for me to change my perspective on women being ordained. One of the things that really bothers me is that if I am a male elder and I'm called to go out frequently with a female elder, as a human being, can I control myself to not come up with some kind of a relationship with that other female elder who doesn't happen to be my wife? I think that's a huge red flag, especially if you were to travel long distances overseas. Even though, we may get separate motel rooms, et cetera, there could develop a relationship that might not be appropriate. And I would be very, very, very cautious. And most of the women I've talked to say, I don't want it. The priesthood, I don't want that responsibility. So it could be that we yet do not really understand totally what priesthood is. It's an authority from God. And that's not to say that a woman can't do godly things, but does God need to or want to or prefer to control those ordinances and actions to the male part of the priesthood? No, I don't think it would change my perspective on things. If I, to begin to see it in her perspective as to the keys and Joseph giving Emma are making that like a quorum.
Okay.
It's a tough thing to explain some of its feelings.
Do you allow women to teach Sunday school?
Oh, yeah.
That sort of a thing?
Absolutely.
I know in the Bickertonite Church, a woman can be called to the office of teacher, which would be an Aaronic priesthood office in our church.
Uh-huh. Same here.
So you allow women to be called to the office of teacher?
No.
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 Okay. So do you allow women, so women do not teach Sunday school or anything?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
You asked me the question, can women teach Sunday school? Yes.
Yes.
But is that the role of a teacher?
What is the role of a teacher?
The role of a teacher is to be more of a counselor, to be able to approach somebody, you, me, or family, or husband and wife, and be able to go in and help them regain some of their relationship with Jesus Christ again through earthly relationships. Does a husband and wife get along and they're getting ready for a divorce? Who do you call? We would send a teacher to that position, to that situation. If it's a financial situation where they need help, I'd send a deacon. If it has to do more with baptism and somebody wanting to be baptized, I would send a priest, because that's what the doctrine, Section 17 of the Doctrine and Covenants, our Doctrine and Covenants.
Oh, it's 20 in ours.
Okay. That's what it says. It gives you that list of duties, being a teacher. Now, that's not to say that, it talks about being able to expound is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
That a teacher or priest, elder ought to be able to expound on the gospel. Can a lady, a really good person, well-educated, be able to expound on the gospel? Oh, yeah. And we've had some writers down through the Heritage Church, Theolona Stevens, for example, who wrote several of the Sunday school manuals, study guides, and so forth. Awesome thoughts. And she was brilliant at what she was doing. And it's still used as a Sunday school text in some places. So she can do that. And certainly my wife could teach Sunday school or, I was going to say that I'm not sure I would limit that just to primary. I don't know that we have any ladies right now who are teaching an adult class, but I wouldn't restrict that.
Okay, so primarily the women are teaching children?
Most of the time, yeah.
And there's no rule against teaching adults, but
correct.
You don't know of any right now?
I can't think of any off the top of my head right now
Okay.
where we've got ladies who are teaching a Sunday school class.
And they're not agitating for that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Do you have any congregations where there's a lot of women and not enough men? Where it would be, I know the community of Christ, they have female pastors.
Yes, yeah.
And so it seems like you're cutting off half of the pool that you could use
Right.
to lead a congregation.
We might have a congregation, and I couldn't tell you which one, that might have, say, 60% women and 40% men in it for some reason or another. We certainly don't have any congregations, branches, to my knowledge, that have 90% women or 95% women in them, even overseas. It's still male-dominated,
I do know,
family-dominated.
was it the
Father-
Philippines or
father-
China? I can't remember. I actually heard a news story where they have a ward full of women, and so a lot of women actually, it's really unusual, do a lot of male callings because they're like nannies or whatever, maids, and they actually hold church every day of the week because they don't know what day they have off, and so it's a pretty interesting ward. I don't know how that would work.
But they'd still have to have a male bishop, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so it sounds like you're very similar with our church on
Very
those
much
sorts
so.
of things.
Yeah.
You did watch my Jim Van Cannon interview. Did he get anything wrong?
Did you do
Been
anything
7
wrong?
years though, right?
Yeah, no, I don't remember enough of the details of that conversation, but no, I don't think so. That was done well.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as trying to compare the Remnant Church to the LDS Church, there's probably a whole lot more similarities between the two. The temple becomes the one differential between the two. As
The
far as
way
the
our
way
two
you
churches
do
do.
the temples
Yeah.
and the way we think of a temple. Yeah.
You're definitely more of old style RLDS.
Well, they didn't have a temple except for the Kirtland Temple, and now the
Right.
one across the street.
Right. So it's more of a meeting place and that sort of a thing.
Our temple,
Yeah.
or what will be the holy sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's more of a meeting place. One of the things I've been trying to explore is what is a solemn assembly. In the second volume of our church history, and I don't know where it would be in yours. I've got copies, but I haven't used that as a reference. Just before the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, so we're looking at 1835 and early 1836. There was a lot of conversation from Joseph and the leadership of the church about having solemn assemblies and what that meant. How does the solemn assembly differ from everyday Sunday morning church service with it, for example? They were also talking about anointings and washings in that January, February, March before the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. And I've really been asking the Lord, what does this mean? Is this something we need to repeat? Why were they doing that? Joseph went to the Quorum of 12, for example. He did that for all of the quorums, but we'll use that as an example. They were meeting, I think it was on an afternoon, and Joseph goes in and proceeds to go through a washing and anointing of every member of the Quorum of 12. Well, these are already men who are ordained into the Quorum of 12, but he's doing this extra ordinance of washing and anointing. What does that mean? I'm not expecting you to have an answer.
LDS have an answer for that.
And I know that the presidents of the LDS Church do washings and anointings in the temple, and that the presidents have a room in the Salt Lake Temple where they may anoint each other or wash each other's feet. Perhaps the Quorum of 12, the president of the LDS Church, may be washing the feet of the Quorum of 12. I've heard. I've not seen that room.
Me either.
Yeah. And foot washing is another ordinance that I think we need to seriously consider as we approach the School of the Prophets for us. And we are approaching that probably late this summer or early fall, where we will begin our School of the Prophets activities. And part of that will be washing the feet of the men. I will wash the feet of the men who want to attend the School of the Prophets. Because I think it's a requirement. It's a humbling experience for both parties to go through that. And I think the studies in the School of the Prophet will be far more in depth. If they're not, we're wasting our time, than if I just went to a Sunday school class on Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon or whenever it might be. But that's where we're heading, and trying to becoming a more spiritually strengthened church, to try to have a greater relationship with Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father, so that when we meet him, we'll be ready to meet him and ready to be in his kingdom.
Well, very good. Yeah, just so you know, for the LDS, because Joseph called the washings and anointings that you were referring to in
Initiations.
Kirtland, yeah, we call it the initiatory ordinance,
Yeah.
and then we have an endowment ceremony, which is more of a Nauvoo era type thing, and so we kind of think Kirtland was kind of the precursor for those sorts of things. But I just remembered talking to you earlier. Believe that you said you had 171 sections in your Doctrine and Covenants.
Yes.
Just for comparison purposes, Community of Christ only has 166, and us LDS are falling way behind with 138. And I also know you. We kind of were looking at the prophets a little bit earlier. You threw out a lot of the stuff from W. Wallace and Wallace B.
Yeah.
And so you've added a lot. Well, let's talk first of all. How many sections would you say that both, first of all, President Larson added, and then how many of you added? Because one of those sections dealt with the Holy Sanctuary that you added as well, right?
Correct. That's correct. Our Doctrine and Covenants, from the beginning, made the difference between Wallace B, W. Wallace, at section 145. That was Israel's last section.
Okay. 145, that was...
145.
Oh, okay.
So everything from 145 to 171 has either been added by Frederick Larson or myself.
Okay.
And I've added, I think, 5.
5, okay. So about 20, 21 for Fred Larson.
Something, whatever that, yeah, I'd have to do the math. But
Okay.
yeah, it's impressive. And I don't know how much you know about our process, okay? Or the viewers, some might not.
Members of your church will know, but I don't think anybody else.
Well, and even going back to our heritage church, the old reorganized church, the process was pretty much the same with it. I'm not going to speak for them today because I don't know. For us right now, for Brother Larson, he would feel inspired at some point. Maybe he would be praying, as Joseph Jr. did so many times. Joseph Jr. would go to the Lord and say, so-and-so wants to know about this, or we need to know about this doctrine. And sometimes our section 17, you said it was 20. The Lord might give that to Joseph and say, here's the instructions for the church right now. You need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and this section reveals that. So the Lord is really giving that to Joseph. Now, whether Joseph sat down and wrote those things out or he talked about them and a scribe wrote them out, I don't know the answers to that question. That's, to me, at least I haven't found that historically documented. For Brother Larson, many times he would spend time in prayer, and he would sense that this is what the Lord wanted to reveal to him and the church. In the same vein of things happening, that's what's happened with me. Maybe, and one time I was sitting on my couch studying the Doctrine and Covenants, and I felt this overwhelming urge to begin to write. And I started scribbling as fast as I could possibly write the thoughts that were coming into my head with it. I later then took a look at those writings, and they're in the drawer down here, and said, did I spell that right? Is that the right punctuation? Those kind of things. And I would type them out on my computer to make it appropriately, to print out right, to read right. I have asked the Lord when I did that, is this what you want? Just to confirm. I then took that document to my counselors and to the bishopric and said, this is what I think the Lord is trying to give to the church for this conference or this time with that. And they, in every case so far, have read through those and studied them through and felt the impress of the Spirit upon them that, yes, this is the Lord. It's not me. It's not Terry. I'm just writing something down. We then take that to the conference. The conference in the quorum sessions reviews the document. They agree with the document or disagree with the document. And there have been times in Fred's case where there was a couple of words that, is this really what we mean here? And Fred actually took that particular phrase back to the Lord and said, okay, is there something better that could be substituted to help clarify what you want, Lord, in that statement, in that document? So the quorums approve it. Then we take it to the body. The body then approves it, and the body hears testimony from each of the quorum leaders saying, yes, we agree that this is the words of the Lord to be presented to the church and to be inserted into the Doctrine and Covenants. The body then also ratifies it, agrees with it, and it is then added to the Doctrine and Covenants. That's our process.
Okay. It's been interesting talking with the community of Christ. And I know talking with Jim, I would assume you have the same feeling on polygamy.
Yeah. No, Joseph wasn't a polygamist.
Okay. Because the community of Christ has actually come around. A lot of the historians have said, we don't like polygamy, but it's pretty clear that Joseph practiced it.
Yeah.
But you're just like, no way, nothing would ever convince you that Joseph practiced polygamy. Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with Jim one time, and he says, I'd love to take this to court because I think I could prove that there was no polygamy involved there. I don't know that I'm that much of a court lawyer to where I could begin to take that to a court situation and validate it. I've seen a lot of writings by Heritage Church men over the years who argue that Joseph never did. Emma never admitted that Joseph had any polygamous affairs or any other wives. There's some rumors that Joseph maybe had an affair with the maid or some teenager in the barn. There was all kinds of different, all those kind of comments. And so even if we looked at a letter or a document, can we validate that that's really true, or is this something that somebody's making up? I know that in the LDS history, there's people who came forward and said, yeah, I was sealed to Joseph with it. Is that polygamy, or is that just a sealing? Well, I'm not sure that I believe Joseph was even sealed to anyone other than Emma. So I'm going to say, no, I don't think polygamy is a part of the church. And even if I look at the Old Testament or the New Testament, where it talks about, I think it's Paul, and I don't remember which book, it says that there is to be but one man, one woman in a marriage for all time. We don't have a marriage for time and eternity as the LDS Church does. We believe that our marriages are for this time, and that our relationships with our wives that we will have in the millennial reign and the celestial kingdom, if we're lucky enough to be there, is more of a brother-sister type relationship than a husband and wife sealed in for time and all eternity. I have a lot of trouble thinking that if I was sealed in the LDS temple and my wife was sealed to me, and my children were sealed to me, my son was sealed to me, for example, and then he goes off to get married, and he gets married in the temple, and he has his own family, and he gets sealed to his family, and he gets his kingdom, and I have my kingdom. Do we ever get to see each other? Those kind of crazy things go through my mind every now and then. If I was sealed to my son in that sense, I think I'd want to be with him for the rest of eternity, not having this division now. Does that mean that he could fly from his kingdom to my kingdom and we could visit each other? I don't know the answer to those kind of questions. So we just don't go there.
So nothing will convince you that Joseph practiced?
No.
DNA test?
No, which hasn't happened yet.
I do know a historian who's working on another possibility, but
As far as I know, nobody's come forth and had Joseph DNA in him that through a second marriage.
right, yeah. There's been 6 tests, and it's always come up negative.
Yeah.
But, and I know it's strange to me how many LDS are adopting that point of view.
And I've talked to a few LDS men who said, I don't think I want to go down that path.
I
One wife's enough.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
But, the funniest thing is about polygamy, the community of Christ, they're actually more open to polygamy now than the LDS church is.
Could be.
Because they're working in places like India and
Sure.
Africa where polygamy
that's
is
a problem.
legal. And
If you go to
accepted.
an Arab country where a man may have 6 or 7 wives or more,
Right.
with that, how do you deal with that? And there was
Exactly.
And there were sections of their Doctrine and Covenants that said that, well, we think this is wrong, but we're going to accept it for now, but they shouldn't continue in the practice. In other words, they shouldn't try to gather
More wives.
More wives. So, what's the solution to that? I don't know the answer to that. We haven't had that dilemma so far.
You don't go to India? So you're staying
We've
out
been
of
in India, but so
Oh.
far everybody in India has been married to just one wife.
Well, it is a good question because in the LDS church, we just say, "Sorry, Charlie, you
Can't
get
join the
baptized."
church. Yeah,
But the community in Christ allows that.
they do.
Like you said, just don't get any more.
Yeah.
I mean, is that
And
something you would consider? Would you consider baptizing a polygamist in India?
Yeah,
or
that's
Africa or
a
something?
scenario. Like I said, we haven't had really approached, but I think maybe logical. I had somebody ask me this question a week or so ago. Might be, okay, brother X, you're coming to me. You've been living in this polygamous marriage situation for a long time. It's been tradition for you. You didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But what I would recommend would be you have a number one wife.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's really who you're married to, is that number one wife. Now, what do you do with number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6? I think there's still a responsibility to that man to somehow or another support and help in every situation with wife number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, or whatever number with that. I think that would be extremely cruel for anybody to say, "Psh, kick them out, put them out on the street," because they're going to end up in situations that are possibly terribly ungodly.
Right.
They might be considered totally unclean, so they might end up in a prostitution situation or in poverty on the streets begging for whatever. That's not right either with it. But so I think that maybe the man ought to be able to support them somehow or another, but they would no longer be married. And I think another criteria might be that number 2, 3, 4, and 5 would have the legal right to a divorce and be able to marry someone else should the opportunity arise. Just my thinking is just kind of an off-the-cuff solution,
Yeah.
but it is a dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. It's just been interesting to see how the community of Christ has handled that.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, I understand the problem, the dilemma. And that was something that I think came into their Doctrine and Covenants while my wife and I were still members of the organized church, because I think I remember that discussion.
I didn't realize that was in the Doctrine and Covenants.
I think it's in their Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah.
It's not mine, but it's in there.
Well, when you guys go to India, we'll have to see how you guys handle that. But
Well, like I said, I was in India 5 years ago. Spent several weeks there. We have one of our main high priests in India had, I think, 13 or 14 little congregations, house churches, that we traveled to and visited with and ministered to. There was another 70, and he's since passed away, but we visited with him, and we visited his 13, 14, 15, whatever the number was. I don't remember officially. The branches, little collections or clusters of saints that he had that were members of the church, and visited with them, but none of them were polygamous.
okay.
And I think the same thing's true with Africa. We have 3 major countries that we're in Africa, Nigeria, Uganda, and Kenya. And according to the apostle that just came back a few weeks ago, I don't think there's any polygamous situations over there at all.
Okay. I know, just for information, they just set apart the first female 70 in India, native-born Indian.
I saw that.
And so, I think, America has its own problem with sexism and misogyny, but it's a whole nother level in India.
Oh, yeah. Not only do we have the caste system that we have to worry about, which is huge, huge over there. I remember being in the high priest house over in India. We were guests in his home for quite a while, the apostle that I was traveling with. And we just about never saw his wife. She just somehow or another felt like she needed to be in the woodwork of the background somehow or another. If we came into the room and tried to speak with her or talk with her, which we both wanted to do dearly, she would kind of back away and say, no.
Oh, wow.
And she spoke a little English. Her husband spoke fluent English, but it was just that tradition that I'm the woman of the house, and you're a man, and I shouldn't talk to you.
It's really interesting. There was a woman from Africa, I'm pretty sure, and she was like, "I'm the only female clergy in my country," and so it was very hard for her to deal with these male clergy who were like, "You're just a woman. Why are you even speaking?"
Yeah.
Those are some real issues. I even remember there was a conference at Utah Valley University several years ago. And, you don't think about these issues, especially here in America. But in Africa, they have a dowry system. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the West, we would find that just terrible and ridiculous. And the LDS churches had to deal with, you shouldn't be paying for your wife. And they were like, "No, you do not understand. This is Africa.
My wife is worth 7 cows."
Exactly. And so the LDS church has really had some struggles with that because, what's culture? What's doctrine? Should we be importing Western values into Africa?
Yeah. I don't know how the LDS Church does their worship services in those foreign countries either. I'm pretty sure that the Community of Christ Church, even while we were there, is pretty open about a different format of worship than what you and I are worshiping.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think the music and the drums.
It's not the tabernacle choir.
No, none of that. And I think I've heard that even in India and Delhi and so forth, where there would be Latter-day Saint congregations and temples, that those worship services are still patterned very much like they would be in the United States.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of what I thought.
We do seem, and it is, I think the LDS Church is trying to be a little bit more open. Because, in Africa, drums are a big deal. Mm-hmm. And in the LDS Church, no, you don't bring drums to sacrament meeting.
Yeah.
And so I think there's been a little bit of relaxation on that a little bit. I don't know. I haven't been to Africa. Maybe some of my missionaries from Africa, you can tell us.
Yeah.
But some of these cultural things are just really hard to deal with. It's really easy when you're in America and this is the way we do things. But when you start spreading to Africa and South America and India and places like that.
Which you would think would make it hard to be a missionary to those foreign places. We even considered, what's it going to be like for us to be missionaries to inner Kansas City? Because if we were to bring in a half a dozen families from inner Kansas City who have been raised in a very ecumenical, praising, song, you get it, type of situation, and we brought them into our congregation, which we'd love to do, and we love them dearly, but are they going to feel comfortable with our faith? Or do we need to bend our worship just a little bit so that they also have an opportunity to worship? I think it's a real question.
Yeah. I think we've hit all the hot button issues. Oh, LGBT, we haven't hit that one. Because that does seem like, I think most of Christianity is really struggling with this issue. The LDS Church is struggling. The Community of Christ has gone a completely different direction. They allow gay clergy. Although I will tell you, John Hamer Friday night was complaining. Of course, John is gay, I guess I should say.
I didn't know that.
He was saying, in 84, we had the revelation to allow women to have the priesthood, and we got women apostles pretty quickly. He says, we've allowed gay clergy for a while, but we still don't have any. The church is still discriminating against gays.
In the upper echelon?
There's no gay apostles in the community of Christ currently.
Okay.
And so he felt like that was a point of discrimination.
But is that just strictly on his part saying we need validation for the lifestyle that we have chosen? That's an open-ended question. But I think that sometimes I think that's what they need from us is validation that the pathway that they have chosen is legitimate.
So you don't allow gay clergy?
No.
You don't support gay marriage?
No. I would probably excommunicate one of my ministers if they were to perform a gay marriage.
Okay. I mean, I guess you're kind of a new church. It seems like culturally, the United States has pretty much accepted gay marriage as an issue, and a lot of churches are bleeding members. The Methodist Church is splitting over this issue. I joke that it's the formerly United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
The Anglican and the Episcopal churches, they've kind of split over this. The Anglicans are much more conservative than the Episcopal. But a lot of churches are struggling with what to do, and a lot of young people are growing up saying, what's wrong? It's legal. Have you seen that as an issue in your church, that people are leaving or people are struggling, especially young people?
No. I know of a couple of members who we think are at least making a claim that they are gay, but they do not practice. And we still love them. We still care about them. But I'm not sure that they feel that comfortable in worship services or in things like that. And probably would not go down the priesthood path with them. Not probably just wouldn't, with that. We still believe that God has a better plan. God's plan is one man, one woman in a family, just like the family proclamation that came out of the LDS Church back in the 90s.
Right.
If I remember right, I think that's a valid document, and we would be very, very close to that. And we do have a document very similar to that.
Okay. So hard no on LGBT stuff.
Correct. Hard line.
So...
and that may get me into a lot of trouble. I'm sure that there are people out there who are pro and would like to challenge me or challenge the church on, I'm surprised we haven't been challenged on women in the priesthood, but so far we're a small enough target. I think that people haven't picked on us too much.
Okay.
There was only 8 people in the ark. That's a joke we have. We're not very big, but we're trying to stick to the right values. I really think the Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon specifically really talks about one man, one woman, and that's God's plan. That's, I've had, interestingly enough, in the years past, I've had one friend that I can remember specifically who was very feminine, for example. Had a wonderful wife. Female wife. But I think sometimes we have, and that may be part of the problem of what's going on right now in the world, is that we have this identity crisis that a male is supposed to be a football star and lots of testosterone and so forth and so on. Therefore, anyone who doesn't fit that particular pattern feels like they got to go on this other pathway. They got to come out of the closet, where maybe they should be just as loved and accepted as a man for being a man of that nature. But I still think one man, one woman is God's plan for marriage.
I know in the LDS Church, especially even at BYU, they had some experiments with conversion therapy where they pray the gay away or whatever you want to
Okay.
say, and that has resulted in suicides.
Yeah.
Do you have a feeling on that? I mean, is it okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it, basically?
I think that's a matter of definition. Is it okay to be gay? What do you mean by that? Not you specifically.
Well, but I mean, you said you had a couple of gay members. If they were to get gay married,
Okay.
would they be excommunicated?
Probably. I certainly don't want teachers in the church to be teaching something that I think is ungodly. No matter what that ungodliness might be.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that dangerous? Isn't that a pathway that we might be sending the church or our people down? If somebody comes in and said, there really isn't a God, would I want someone in the church to teach the fact that there isn't a God, or that whatever other doctrinal issue might be out there? I mean, we could look at things like evolution. What do we believe in evolution? There's a lot of argument about, is the earth 6,000 years old? Is Genesis for real?
You had a book on there that had that name.
I have a tape that I was,
Okay, I saw that.
a CD,
earlier.
yeah, is Genesis for real? Is Genesis History, I think, is the name of that CD. And
Is it?
what do I personally believe?
Right.
Yes. Genesis is for real. You're familiar with Rod Meldrum?
Very.
Yeah.
I spoke at the Ferb Foundation recently.
I have Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the Universal Model Science.
Okay. Are you a Heartlander?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
I am. I think a lot of our churches too. So I know Wayne May. Met him several times. He's used our facility when he comes to Independence to teach. I think that the Universal Model, not to plug Rod Meldrum and his, Dean Sessions, I think, is the scientist that wrote those two books, those two textbooks. I've had a chance to go through them. They're kind of college-level science, which kind of went over my head just a little bit. But I think he proposes a lot of questions, such as, yes, scientists are coming out and saying X is true, but have they really gone through the testing process? Have they really gone through the proving process? Or is this just a theory? And many, many times, the science things that we're being taught as fact are not fact, they're theory. And therefore, we should be able to question them or come up with a secondary theory. One of the things that I look at, and you look at the old Earth, New Earth controversy, is, okay, which one of us as scientists were there? Well, none of us. The only person who was there was God. So I guess I'm going to look at God's work and say, God must be the authority. And he says it's 6,000 years old.
Can't we argue that's an interpretation, though?
It could probably.
Because, I mean, let's go the science angle there for a second. We were just talking about polygamy, and Ugo Perego was the guy who's done this 6 studies. He's tested 6 children of Joseph Smith, ruled Joseph Smith out as the father of all 6 children other than Emma. He thinks that the Native Americans crossed the Bering Strait, let's just say it that way, 30,000 years ago, which is a lot older than 6,000 years. So this is the same guy that you support his polygamy conclusions.
But I don't support his 30,000
But you don't support his other DNA where he's like, the Indians have been here for 30,000 years here in North America.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
I'm not a scientist. I'm a retail manager. And so it's difficult for me to get into those kind of in-depth. But I think we have to question, how do we determine that somebody came over the Bering Strait 30,000 years ago? What is their proof? What is their validation that is true?
But he's a DNA expert. And
he says the DNA came across?
Basically Asians came across. I mean, this completely refutes the Heartland model. We get to the Kennewick Man. The Kennewick Man is 10,000 years old. Now, Rod Meldrum likes to say the Kennewick Man was a Nephite. Your timeline's off a bit, you know.
Yeah,
if you're going to say that, and I shouldn't say Rod Meldrum. There's other people that Rod supports that point of view.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of people, especially when we look at Heartland, and you know, even back to the old age of the earth, you know, geologically, there's a lot of people that are going to say, look, I mean, even some of the early LDS apostles weren't against evolution. They were for old earth. And, you know, Joseph...
I have a lot of trouble with evolution, but that's...
You know, carbon dating, I know that's another issue.
That's another issue.
You know, I teach carbon dating. I teach at Utah Valley University. We talk about you find a leaf, how much carbon is in it. You can use it. It decays at a certain rate. I mean, you're breaking the principles of chemistry if you don't follow this. And we found stuff. It's really good for stuff that's up to 30,000 years old. Okay, so we... They calibrate it and fix things based on tree rings and things like that. I understand that. But if you go back 30,000 years, carbon dating is excellent. And so it's hard for me as a math science person to say the Earth's only 6,000 years old.
Yeah, I get it.
We've got too much scientific evidence there.
Now, I heard one theory. Obviously, again, I'm not in your field and I'm not in their field either, but if you took a look at the Earth, let's see, the first day was 1,000 years. So there's a first day, second day.
Well, that's an interpretation.
Okay. Yeah, I know. It's it's a theory. I'm exactly right. So there's 7,000 years plus the 6,000 years from Genesis on. So now the Earth is 13,000 years old. That's another theory.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting thought. Maybe that's true. I also remember reading in, I think it's Sessions' Universal Model textbook, and again, I'm not trying to advertise his book, but where they did an experiment on creating fossils, and they were able to create a fossil within 24 hours. He says it's a matter of the right conditions, the right timing, the right amount of pressure, the right amount of, and there's several different factors there. Then if all of those factors are available or created by the scientists in the lab, that this can be happening. So he took that, and they were trying to work on something else. They took a big pressure cooker and had a certain amount of water and so forth and so on, and you'll have to read the chapter on that. But in that chapter, they opened up the pressure cooker the next morning and found out they had fossilized wood that they had just put in there 24 hours ago. So again, it has, you know, what is the situation? What is the conditions? And if all of the conditions are right and present, then is it possible to have a fossil in 24 hours? Well, he's okay. Here's the scientific steps we went through, and ta-da!
My response to be that we can still carbon date it.
Maybe. He has an answer for that. I'm looking forward to Volume 3. I don't think it's come off the press yet.
Okay. Well, I think I've asked you all the cans of worms here. What do we probably should leave on? What do you want people to know about the Remnant Church? Why should people join? You know, what are some distinctive doctrines that you guys have?
I think the Remnant Church is trying to do its very, very best to be a church like it was in 1830. Yeah. And to try to hold to the doctrines and the practices that we believe, at least, Joseph presented as being an element of God's church, so that we can build a Zionic community and be prepared for that Zionic community when the time comes that Christ returns with that. So that's who I think we are. And I'm trying to lead the church to go beyond their current worship thought patterns and traditions, if you would. And traditions is another funky word, but trying to allow the experiences for our people to have that will increase their relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what I want the church to do. So that we could be like the two men on the road to Emmaus who are able to walk with the Lord and the Savior and talk with him and eventually go, oh, you're it. You know, that's what I'd like to have for our people, to be able to have that. One of the last revelations that I was able to bring forth talked about, and Fred brought this up earlier, but Fred's counsel was for the church to read, study, and obey. Read the scriptures, study them out, and obey what's there. And in my more recent one, read that you might have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Study the way that he did things. Look at the book of Acts. Look at the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. How did Christ react to individuals? How does Christ react to the sinner? How does he react to the lady at the well? I'm sure there might have been LGBT people that were there at that time. It's as old as the sun. How did Christ react to them? He loves everybody. He cares about them. Yeah, we understand that. But that doesn't mean that I need to accept the sin. I don't think Christ ought to accept my sin. In fact, he died on the cross for my sins. But I have to give them up so that I'm more like he is and can be a minister that is filled with the Holy Spirit so that I can do what he wants me to do to fulfill the calling and the mission that he has given me.
Fantastic. Well, Terry Patience, prophet, president of the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I want to thank you, especially because this was literally, hey, you're the president.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
He knocked on our door, and I answered the door.
And I said, do you know Terry Patience?
Yeah,
I know.
pretty well. Better than anybody.
So I really appreciate you for doing this. This is fantastic. So,
well, I'm glad to have done this. We've had a good chat all afternoon. I hope I've done the church well. They'll be the judge of that, I guess. What did you say?
All right. Well, thanks again for being here on Gospel Tangents. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. God bless.
God bless. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Prophet President Terry Patience. Terry, thank you so much for sitting down with me. This was spur of the moment, literally, and I really appreciate it. I also appreciate you letting me ask you about a lot of those hot button issues that I'm sure weren't fun to answer. In our next conversation, we're going to have a Community of Christ historian, Dr. Mark Shearer. Okay, so you went to Graceland?
Went to Graceland. Graduated the class of 72.
1972, that sounds like you're about the same age as Bruce Jenner, aren't you?
Bruce Jenner, yes, was a classmate of mine, and we had some interesting times together, wonderful memories of that, to be able to see him at Munich.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, you can hear the audio only at patreon.com/gospeltangents. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview with no interruptions. If you want to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can also sign up at Patreon or on youtube.com/gospeltangents and just subscribe here. You can watch the entire video uncut before everybody else. Also, if you'd like to continue to support Gospel Tangents, you can either sign up for our $10 or $20 memberships, or you can get some cool gear like this hat. I've got the coffee mugs like this here. We've got sweatshirts and t-shirts, and I'm even thinking about ties. Somebody said they wanted a tie, so I'll see if I can get that on my store. So go to gospeltangents.com store, and you can get some Gospel Tangents gear. So you don't want to miss that. So anyway, thanks for listening. If you'd like to check out some of our other videos, check out here.